Whether it's Real Madrid's golden generation of the 1950s who dominated European football, or Johan Cruyff's Barcelona dream team of the early 90s which influenced all of the modern game, Spain have undeniably been a footballing heavyweight for decades. But despite producing many great players, until 2008 we could never look at the national team in quite the same way. Fernando Hierro, Emilio Butragueño, Paco Gento, Pep Guardiola and the great Raúl, to name a few. However, none stood out more than Luis Suarez, who to this day is the only Spanish-born player to win the Ballon d'Or. And it was with Suarez that Spain hosted and won the 1964 European Championships, an achievement that was supposed to begin Spain's life as a serious contender at every major tournament. But this didn't happen, as they became one of international football's biggest sleeping giants. The next 4 decades will be full of disappointment, failing to qualify for 5 out of 8 tournaments between 1966 and 1980, never making it out of the group stage when they did qualify. Even disappointed when they hosted the 1982 World Cup, but at least they did make it out of the first group stage. Spain finished as runners-up at Euro 1984, losing in the final to the excellence of Michel Platini. And over the next 11 tournaments they only failed to qualify once, making it out of the group stage 7 times. However, whilst this was progress, this was still some way short of what the country were capable of on the international stage. So what changed? How did Spain go from perennial underachievers to arguably the greatest international side of all time? Well, after Spain were dumped out of Euro 2004 in the group stages, fans were calling for a revolutionary figure to lead the national team. When the Spanish Federation announced Luis Aragones as manager, a lot of questions were asked. He was an experienced manager but seen as part of the old Spain, with most of his successes coming in the 70s and 80s. Aragones was seen as outdated. For example, in 1998, he actively fought against Spanish football's progression when he said, "We have dedicated ourselves to this idea that we all need to be brilliant on the ball, but no, Spain is not that kind of football team. We should not go against our DNA." However, Aragones was ironically the man who instigated the Tiki-Taka revolution and was the perfect man to change the culture and unite the national team. Spain is a divided country. Look at this map. It shows the population centres and how the majority of Spanish people live far away from each other, creating various distinct cultures. You have the south, which is influenced by their Moorish history, whereas in the northwest is Galicia, influenced by its Celtic roots. In the east, we can see the most extreme examples of separatism with Catalonia and the Basque Country, and these regions all surround an isolated capital of Madrid. But it's not just geography. 20th century Spain was full of conflict and political instability, which created a very divided country. I won't go into specifics, but my point is rivalries in Spain aren't just petty local disputes like they are in England, for example. A lot of the time, they are deep-rooted in historical, political, and cultural differences. Spanish football is defined by these divisions, and that is why the appointment of Luis Aragones was so crucial. You could argue that really nobody understood Spanish football better. Coming from the capital, he was a legend at Atletico as both a manager and a player, but he also managed both clubs in Seville and both clubs in Barcelona, as well as Valencia, Real Oviedo and Mallorca. Aragones understood the differences amongst Spanish people, but he also understood what united them: football. And to unite Spanish football under one badge, he had to do 3 things. Firstly, he needed to establish an identity in the style of play. Secondly, he needed to rebuild the squad. And finally, he had to win a trophy. At the 2006 World Cup, Spain impressed, winning every group game in stylish fashion, and it was here where a Spanish commentator coined the term Tiki-Taka, identifying a style of play that felt uniquely Spanish. The 2006 team loved to attack, scoring 8 goals in 3 games as they cruised into the round of 16, where they were unlucky to face France. They lost 3-1, but as a result of this, Luis Aragones made his second key decision: to rebuild the squad in his vision, doubling down on his tactical ideas rather than picking the big name players. He went to war with certain parts of the Spanish press who crucified him for excommunicating the crown prince of Spanish football, Raúl, from the national team. Raúl was just 29 years old and was the all-time leading goalscorer for both Spain and Real Madrid. But Aragonés did not like how much Raúl dominated the game as an individual, instead putting his faith in players who he felt would suit the team more. Firstly with Fernando Torres, who had an incredible debut year at Liverpool, and also in David Villa, who had been scoring goals consistently for Zaragoza and Valencia. He also dropped Joaquin and Jose Antonio Reyes, favouring more technical players such as Andres Iniesta, David Silva and Santi Cazorla to play in the wide areas rather than traditional wingers. But this wasn't all simply genius from Luis Aragonés. He had a golden generation coming through. Just look at the records at youth level of players selected for Euro 2008 during the late 90s and early 2000s. As a result, Spain had the youngest squad at the tournament. However, there's this myth that Spain's success was built off the back of Barcelona and Real Madrid. That was not the case at this tournament. Unlike squads of future tournaments, only 5 of the 23 played for either of the El Clasico clubs. So Aragonés had established a style of play and rebuilt a squad which truly represented all of Spain. Now, all that was left to do was the small matter of going and winning a trophy. Despite having a great squad, Iker Casillas said that Spain went into Euro 2008 simply thinking about competing with dignity. Just reaching the semi-finals would have felt like a huge achievement. But this feeling soon turned into genuine optimism after Spain started the tournament in fantastic form against Russia, who turned out to be the surprise package of Euro 2008. David Villa made it 2-0 before half-time and completed his hat-trick in the second half. Pavlyuchenko scored a late consolation before Fabregas buried the game in injury time as it ended 4-1. The strike force of David Villa and Fernando Torres was a devastating partnership, with both players capable of dropping into midfield or drifting out wide whilst the other stayed in the centre as the goal threat. And it was these two who wrote the headlines once again in the second game against a strong Sweden side. The Liverpool forward opened the scoring with a header in the first half before Zlatan Ibrahimovic equalised for the Swedes. And the game appeared to be heading for a draw when all of a sudden Joan Capdevila played a long ball down the flank. David Villa latched onto the pass and scored a lovely goal in injury time to secure all 3 points. A vital goal, as it meant that Spain had surely won the group, barring any disaster in their final match against Greece. This allowed Luis Aragonés to rotate the entire team as La Liga top scorer Dani Guiza proved himself as fantastic backup. Greece were winning 1-0 at half-time thanks to a goal from Euro 2004 hero Angelos Charisteas. But in the second half, Guiza changed the game with an assist for Ruben de la Red's equaliser before heading in an 88th minute winner. There were 3 main things that Spanish fans feared from previous tournaments: the quarterfinals, penalty shootouts, and their Mediterranean rivals and world champions, Italy, who they had a terrible record against. The Italians had qualified from the group of death, and their game plan was to give the Spanish players as little room as possible. Spain could dominate almost any opponent, but Italy's tactics worked and made for a very boring game. Spain had the majority of the possession, however Italy had the better of the actual chances. Ultimately, neither side could score, and the game finished 0-0 after extra time. Spain hadn't progressed past a quarter-final since 1984 and had been knocked out on penalties on 3 separate occasions in that period. Needless to say, many Spanish fans felt that the writing was on the wall. However, this Spanish team were all about breaking curses, and this time it was Iker Casillas' turn to be the hero, going head-to-head with arguably the game's greatest goalkeeper, Gigi Buffon. The Real Madrid shot stopper saved Daniele De Rossi's penalty before Buffon matched him by saving Dani Guiza's. After which, Casillas told Guiza not to worry because he would save the next one, which he did, allowing Fabregas to smash the ball home and put Spain into their first semi-final for 24 years. Casillas was the hero in the shootout, but in the game itself, Spain's best player was their unsung hero of this tournament, Marcos Senna. He was the predecessor to Sergio Busquets in defensive midfield and played the role brilliantly. Luis Aragonés identified Senna, who was born in Brazil, as his ideal holding midfielder, and he convinced him to switch allegiances from the nation of his birth after he gained Spanish citizenship. Whilst Real Madrid only had 2 players in this squad, Senna was one of 3 Villarreal players, with each of them playing a vital role. Joan Capdevila was excellent at left back, defending brilliantly whilst also contributing to the attack by holding the width. Santi Cazorla replaced either Andres Iniesta or David Silva around the hour mark in all but one match and was very important in Spain maintaining control later in the games. However, Marcos Senna was the jewel in the crown of Spain's Yellow Submarine trio. The quarterfinal against Italy was his best performance, but he was fantastic throughout the tournament. The semi-final saw Spain face a familiar force, as victories over Greece and Sweden had allowed Russia to forget their 4-1 loss to the Spanish. However, it was their 3-1 quarter-final win against the Netherlands which earned Russia the title of Dark Horses. With players such as Andrei Arshavin, Roman Pavlyuchenko and Yuri Zhirkov, they played brave football that had seen them reach their first semi-final for 20 years. As the referee blew for half-time with the score at 0-0 and Spain limited to half chances, it seemed that Russia had learned their lesson from their opening game. Add to that an injury to the tournament's top scorer David Villa, and Spanish fans feared the worst. However, his replacement Cesc Fabregas allowed La Roja to gain more control in the game and arguably was a blessing in disguise. It was perhaps the moment that changed Spanish football forever, as it demonstrated that the added control gained from having 5 midfielders was perhaps more effective than the goal threat of having both Villa and Torres. And what followed was arguably the finest 45 minutes in Spanish football history. Iniesta combined with Barca teammate Xavi for the first goal after 50 minutes, and from here Spain didn't look back. Russian defender Sergei Ignashevich compared playing that second half to being slowly crushed by a boa constrictor. Such was the control exerted by Spanish players. And the brilliance of this performance was all about the midfield. Xavi won Player of the Tournament for his excellent playmaking and dictating every match he played in, whilst David Silva and Andres Iniesta played out wide but would drift inside and link with teammates. Dani Guiza added a second goal with a cheeky finish which confirmed the result before David Silva killed the game in the 82nd minute and sent Spain to their first final since 1984. When Spain walked out in Vienna for the Euro 2008 final, there was genuine optimism amongst Spanish fans. Gone was the feeling of these perennial underachievers because, at this tournament, it couldn't really be debated. Spain were the best team. Now, whilst that was true, their opponents Germany had actually arguably been the most entertaining side, with 3-2 victories against Portugal and Turkey in the knockouts. They also had the tournament experience and about 3 times as many fans in attendance, so this was always going to be a close game. David Villa was unable to play, but after the performance in the semi-final, there were no real worries about the inclusion of Fabregas. However, it would not be easy for the Spanish, as they were unable to control the game to their usual standards thanks to the likes of Bastian Schweinsteiger and Michael Ballack. Despite this, Spain still created more chances. Torres even gave the Germans a warning when he hit the post from a header. But with not much separating the teams, it was clear that this game would be won by fine margins, and that's exactly what happened when Xavi played the ball through to Torres. El Niño dinked Jens Lehmann with a beautiful finish to make it 1-0. The Germans tried to recover the game, but the Spanish would not let them through and held on to win just their second ever major trophy. 44 years of pain and disappointment ended by a moment of magic from Fernando Torres. Ended by bold decisions from Luis Aragones. Ended by the greatest Spanish team the world had ever seen. For now. They wouldn't have been thinking about what was to come next, as the man who scored to beat Spain in the 1984 final, Michel Platini, handed Iker Casillas the trophy. But this was merely the beginning of the Tiki-Taka revolution.